you've got yourself a Heisman candidate for the first time in a long, long time.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about it. You present that question. I guess Jadavian Clowney actually was a Heisman candidate in what, 2011? Is that about right?
That's who
2012,
came to mind when I said that, actually.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I label him a Heisman candidate. He's got a lot of work to do. But he would certainly had a great back half of 2014, and we'll see what Lenora Sellers can do. I want to see his development. We're kind of watching that with spring football that they've got going on right now, and how he performs. What relationship he develops with his wide receivers. I think that's really important for him because you're talking about basically a brand new wide receiving group that is going to come in, and a lot of unknowns. Mazio Bennett, Nick Harbor, a lot of freshmen. Jared Brown is back for another year. So, those are big things that make for him to be a Heisman candidate. Plus, throw in there, he's got a new offensive coordinator in Mike Shula.
Yeah. And so, how was that hire received by you and the fan base?
Um, I think there was a lot of people that thought there could have been an out of the box hire, but also Mike Shula was credited with a lot of the development of Lenora Sellers, and a lot of people also pointed out the fact that Mike Shula was instrumental in what Cam Newton did in his MVP season with the Carolina Panthers. So I think there was a lot of people who thought, okay, well, you've got this kind of quarterback. Look at what he's done in the past, and so therefore they were able to kind of accept it. I think once again, and I think a lot of fan bases are this way, when you have an opening coordinator position, you expect the hot new name, right? You expect to be able to go out and land whatever that name is. And South Carolina, I think fans thought that was what would happen. And you go with a guy who has learned, who has been on the staff, who understands Lenora Sellers, who is standing down on the sidelines eye to eye with him this past season. I think that's what's important.
Now, if we rewind to the last couple of weeks of last season, and then the way it played out with a win against Clemson and the college football playoff committee making the selections that they did. Of course, they went by record, doon 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 on down the line, and that left out Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina in the SEC. Was there a lot of angst? Was there a lot of anger? Was there whether that be from yourself? Did you think that the committee should have looked past the records per se and looked at, okay, this South Carolina team is on fire right now and playing as well as anyone?
Well, you're asking me. You're asking my opinion on that. My opinion is you take the 12 best teams. I don't. Well, let me take that back. You take the teams that are qualified based on the automatic bids and how everything works out. I have no problem with what they chose. All right, I have no problem with what they chose. Let's be clear about that. I do think that the fact for the South Carolina fan base, they were that close. This I don't know how close I can show you there. I think that they were that close, and they've never been that close because obviously it's been a 14 playoff. Yes, I do think there was, as you use the word, angst. I think that there was anger, but the truth of the matter to me was you lost to Alabama in a head to head, you lost to Mississippi in a head to head. Neither of those got in, and so we could do an hour long show on how that all kind of played out. But I think the fact that they were that close, and I know a lot of people want to point to the LSU loss and what happened and the foul that was called, the flag that was called on Garrett Nussmeyer, or on Kyle Kennard on Garrett Nussmeyer. I get it. There's a lot there, but but Mark, I think it worked out. I'm okay with how things worked out. Now the South Carolina fan base looked at it as, hey, look at what we just did. We have the hottest team in the country. It didn't help the fact that you had the ESPN talking heads constantly saying South Carolina was the hottest team in the country with maybe the best player in Lenora Sellers. I think that hurt. But the truth be, they probably didn't deserve to be in. That's my opinion. Again, I'm not speaking for anybody at my radio station or that I know. That's my opinion. But the bottom line is that they just came up a little bit short. But the fact that they were so close, I think ignites that conversation about how close they were and what they could have been.
So the surface analysis of trying to relate what happened in 2024 to 2025 is that Shane Beamer's a young coach. He's built uh, a good thing going there in South Carolina. I don't want to overplay it. He's 1 year away from 5-7, but the starting quarterback's back, and as I mentioned, a dark horse candidate is a Heisman contender. So the surface thought is that the South Carolina team is kind of a chic pick to do some damage this year. But has Shane Beamer built this program from the inside out and with the stability along the line of scrimmage and everything that's needed in the SEC to be a real factor year in year out?
Okay. Welcome to the new world of college football. That's a great question. Are we worried about being a factor in the SEC? Or are you asking me about being a factor in the college football playoff? Those are two entirely different things, right? Yes.
Oh, absolutely they are. We just
Okay.
saw Ohio State play, a devastating game against Michigan and they turned it right around and won a national championship.
So here's where I go with that. The SEC is always going to be very difficult. I think there are this particular year. I think there are flaws. I question the running back position and what they can do there. I think the offensive line, even with the talent they have coming back, has got to take a step forward. I think the defensive line has lost a lot of players. Do they have guys who are ready to take a step forward? Transfers that are ready to produce like they were expected to. So, when you ask that question, I honestly think it is a year to year deal now. Your team, the 2024 team does not stand on merit for the 2025 team. The 2025 team will be separate of 2024 and whatever 2026 could be. So I do think, to answer your question, yes, I do think that they're ready to be that program. But that is based on this year's team, and this year's team has some significant questions as it pertains to, is the offensive line ready to produce? Is the defensive line going to be able to replenish a guy, TJ Sanders, who I don't think is in mock drafts for the first round anymore, probably the second round. Kyle Kennard, the Butkus Award winner, is the defensive line ready? So I think when you ask that question, it's because I feel like you were asking about completely moving forward into the future and not just about 1 year in time. I think we're talking about 1 year. Is this team ready to replicate what they did in 2024 in 2025?
No, it's a good point because the turnover is so high for everyone. At first, it was just okay. Colorado's going crazy, and there's a few teams here and there that are going crazy, but it's completely out of the coach's hands at this point in regards to, or at least on one side of it, it is in terms of maintaining players, unless you want to spend on your current roster and try to keep guys around. But it is a different state of college football for sure. I think that the question that I asked, you could still put a very few select into having arrived at a place. Not that they can't fall from that pedestal, but Georgia, Ohio State, there's a few, but they're very few.
Well, look at Florida State this year, and look at Florida State in 2023.
Sure.
I mean that's college athletics. We could do a whole show on this. I think college athletics is a year to year basis now, and so you see Florida State, who I, by the way, think should have been in the playoff. Boy, you want to talk about doing a show in 2023? I think Florida State should have been in there. They went undefeated in a Power Five conference, but then look at what they did last year. Well, what do we expect Florida State to bounce back and do this year? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that right now. It's only April. South Carolina went from being 8-4 in 2022, playing Notre Dame in a fantastic Gator Bowl, to 5-7 the following year, to 9-3. So what do we expect of this year? Well, I like the team. I like there are some players there that are really, really good, but can the transfers gel? Can everything that you're trying to accomplish gel? I just think it's a year to year basis. Now, there are programs I think are set up to be successful for the long term. but you have that year, and let's see how Florida State does. You have that year where you fall off. South Carolina is one of those programs that's not set up. They can be 10-2 one year because you get the right mix of transfers. They can be 2-10 the following year because you just completely mess up the transfer portal.
Well, I'm going to back up your analysis. I won't call it a philosophy because it's the truth. It's not a theory, because we're seeing it play out and have for the last 4 or 5 years, and it just the numbers are just growing in volume and in the level of players that are in the transfer portal. But I'll tell you this, Will, that probably 6 or 7 years ago, it kind of dawned on me in looking at all the preseason publications, Street and Smiths, Athlons, et cetera, that these publications were being extremely conservative, predicting the records for these teams. And I was thinking, seems like they're barely any variance from season to season. They're pretty much playing it safe. Now, I don't know if they're doing that because that's a true analysis or they're just trying to not look bad. So what I started doing was started looking at year to year standings and thinking, okay, just looking at the Power 5, how many teams across the country have at least a 3-game win increase or decrease from season to season? And I just picked 3 because it seems significant. If you're 6-6 and you go to 9-3, that's pretty significant. It's typically been 70 Power 4 teams currently, about 20 to 22. Last year it was 29. So more than a third of the Power Conference teams had a big increase or a big decrease. So that speaks to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't think you can figure it out. I just on our radio show from 6 to 9 in the morning and here in Columbia, Florence, and Myrtle Beach, 107.5 The Game. I think you're judging everything year to year. There's no longer a value of looking at your head coach and saying, well, does he have this recruiting class? Let's give him 3 to 5 years. Oh, he's recruiting really, really well. The transfer portal has changed all of that. And so I think that's what we're doing with football now, or basketball. Basketball, throw baseball in there. I'm watching South Carolina baseball, but I think that's the value. There's no longer a long term project. It's year to year. What are you doing? And then it's an athletic director thinking, okay, does my guy know how to handle this? How is he recruiting? But is he replenishing talent? There's a lot more than it used to be, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Chris, your buddy Shane Beamer had a bounce back year last year, won 9 games in the regular season. There was talk in November from a lot of us that this was one of the best teams in college football and should be given a shot to go into the playoff. And if they would have only had, a few bounces of the ball go their way against LSU in particular, also Alabama, then maybe they would have had that chance to cap off their season. And they had quite the testy bowl encounter with Brett Bielema in Illinois. That was entertaining. Your thoughts about whether that was a 1-year deal, but with Lenora Sellers back, I know that they lose some quality on the defensive front that was so dominant last year. But Lenora Sellers back, he's a dark horse Heisman candidate. Whether this South Carolina is truly in a position to contend
for the college football playoff, Mark, I admittedly am still a little bit skeptical. I think it's just been so long, too, since we've seen South Carolina put back-to-back seasons like that together. Like winning 9 games back-to-back years. I mean, we're talking about a program, Mark, that, has only won 9 or more games in a season, I believe, 8 times now. Like, it doesn't happen all that often. And, like the Spurrier years were unprecedented because they actually stacked good years on good years. Now, here's the good news, Mark. You got one of the most dynamic players at quarterback in all of college football, Lenora Sellers. My question is, where is his help coming from, right? Like, you lose Rocket Sanders. That is a big loss. And I know they picked up the kid. I believe it's Faison from, I believe it's Utah State. Utah State. They're really high on him and excited for him. So we'll see how he fills the shoes. Offensive line is always a question for South Carolina. Again, the beauty is you've got a guy in Lenora Sellers that, can help out your offensive line a lot. New offensive coordinator, Mike Shula, takes over for Dowell Loggins. What does that look like? At the wide receiver position, Nick Harbor is now focusing on football full time. That could pay off major dividends for them because I mean, we all know about his athleticism, his speed, right? The 99 overall speed on EA college football. I mean, he's a track star, right? That could pay off big dividends if he can become a true wide receiver one. I think defensively is where I probably have more questions, Mark, because last year, the thing that allowed Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard to both have great seasons was that they had each other, right? You had a complimentary guy on the other. You couldn't really just double team Kennard or double team Stewart because you're leaving somebody out on an island, right? So who is the other edge that steps up across from Dylan Stewart? We know Dylan Stewart's going to be fantastic, but like when you look at the production they lost defensively, Mark, I think that is where I have some skepticism. Like, can that defense really be that good again? Losing guys like Nicky Manwari and Debo Williams and Kyle Kennard, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, right? It's just not easy to replace those guys. But Shane Beamer Company showed last year they went in the portal. They got guys that were sort of diamonds in the rough. So maybe you trust them this year. They'll do that again. And then, of course, the schedule. I mean, it is what it is, right? South Carolina's got one of the toughest schedules in the country every single year. But I look at them as probably more realistically, Mark, a 7 to 8 win team. I don't know that I'm buying into them being a 9+ or getting to the college football playoff. I just think they have so much to replace defensively. And part of me, Mark, again, you know my history, like as closely as I follow there's a part of me where I just have to see it. I just have to see them put back-to-back, 9+ win seasons, those kind of seasons together. We'll see if they can do it. But again, the one thing they've got that you cannot argue, dynamic quarterback, that's going to give you a chance.